in 2000 I had a major accident. I fell off a truck, but I grabbed hold of the truck as I was going, and in the process reefed the nerves off my left shoulder and my back. I was treated for nearly 2 years, and everybody was telling me that the nature of the injury, we can't operate, you've pulled the nerves off your spine and you'll just have to get used to the fact that you can only lift your arm that far. I didn't have any shoulder movement. I could lift my arm up, but my shoulder was another thing. And John had a healing service in 2000, and he had 4 nights at one by COC. I went along to all 4 nights. 3 nights I was prayed over and was keeping on believing, and I was getting a bit cranky actually by the 4th night, because I was seeing people get out of wheelchairs and others walk out of splints and others get their blind eyes healed, and I was still hanging in the line waiting. John prayed for me on the 4th night, and moments after he prayed for me, my arm suddenly went straight up in the air. I found myself clapping my hands above my head, and I hadn't been able to lift my arm over there for 2 years. It was just like somebody else was lifting my arm up. I knew straight away then that God had touched me big time. I then went concreting 3 days later, after having not worked for 2 years, so it was a real good healing. In 2004, I had to take some time off work. A friend of mine had had a heart attack and he needed a hand, and in the process of that I was using a chainsaw and many other tools for 7 days. And on the 6th day, unfortunately, I had a major accident where I cut the thumb off, and they had to pin it back on and do a bone graft in there. And I wasn't covered by compensation by this at all. They worked on it for 2 years or more, gradually changing with a heap of different splints, keeping it all in shape and together. They gradually changed it so that my hand would come back, but they told me that I really needed an operation which would freeze my whole wrist to stop the pain, because I'd actually cut half the scaphoid bone and everything away. They'd tried a bone graft and that wasn't successful, and a year later they took me back in again, and they once again suggested that they give me another operation, freeze all those bones in there, and that would take the pain away from my wrist. But by that time I'd started getting a little movement in my wrist, and I was starting to function again, and I said to them, well, what will happen with this movement? They said, well, you'll lose all that. And I said, well, can we leave the operation, because I'm getting used to having a little bit of movement and I'm building on it. So they put me off for a year and told me to come back in a year. During that time, those 2 fingers had sort of been atrophied like that and locked up because of being held in that position for so long. They told me that I'd probably be best to get a couple of the joints taken off that, because they'd just get in the road. And I said, no, leave them there, God can't heal them if you take them away. So another year later, I was getting strength and I was able to do a lot more things with my hand than I had been able to. And I said, no, we'll leave it, but leave me on the list. So I went away from there, and I was driving home from Brisbane hospital, and as I drove up I went, God, they're probably the best surgeons in Australia. I've already been told that they really know their stuff and everything like that, but what they've told me I'm not going to accept, because I believe you've got something better for me. Now, God's more than a coincidence, because on Sunday night John Mallow came back into our church for the first time in over 5 years. I was still actually wearing this splint at the time, and I was catching people, and John recognised me from all those years before, and he asked me, hi Gary, how's your shoulder? And I went, it's really good, and held my arm up. And he said, oh, what have you done? And I explained that I'd had a major altercation with a chainsaw, and that they don't really take prisoners, and that I've been in a bit of strife for a couple of years now. He asked me then, he says, let's pray and let's believe God for something better. And I said, no problem. So we prayed. As my works in the faith, I took the brace off. I've never put it back on. But after John prayed and I took the brace off, I didn't have the feeling that it was going to fall off anymore, and it had felt like that for a long time, that when it wasn't in the brace, a slight movement, it felt like it could just fall off because it didn't feel connected, you know. In the last 6 months I've actually been back working in the truck, driving an 18-speed gearbox, which you need to use your thumb and those two fingers pretty much all the time to manage. Now, the doctors told me I couldn't. I believed that I needed to, and John and I agreed in prayer that God was going to heal it, and within a few months I was back working again. I've got incredible strength in my left hand now. People shake my hand, they go, whoa, and I believe it's almost stronger than my right one. John's ministry has been instrumental in 2 miracles in my physical body, but there's been lots and lots more I've been witness to through that ministry.